What if the message most likely to stay in his mind is not the one that says the most, but the one that leaves just enough unsaid? Most women believe that if they want a man to become more interested, they need to communicate more messages, more explanations, more questions, more emotional reassurance. But there is a psychological problem with this approach. When you give someone everything immediately, you leave very little for their mind to discover. The most powerful text is often not the longest one. It is the one that creates a small gap between what you say and what he wants to know. Because attention and curiosity are not the same thing. A man may reply to you because he is polite, bored, interested for the moment, or simply accustomed to your attention. But making him want to pursue is different. Pursuit begins when his own mind starts participating in the interaction. He starts wondering, what did she mean? Why did she say that? What made her think of me? Is there something more behind those words? That is where curiosity becomes powerful. The mistake is trying to remove every question before he even has the chance to ask one. You explain your feelings, you clarify your intentions, you send another message when he doesn't respond. You try to keep the conversation alive at all costs. And slowly, without realizing it, you become the person carrying the entire interaction. But attraction becomes more revealing when you stop carrying it alone. There is a simple 5-word message that can communicate interest without begging for attention, warmth without emotional dependence, and curiosity without revealing everything you feel. I'm not going to reveal those 5 words just yet, because the words themselves are only half of the strategy. The real power comes from understanding why such a short message can affect the dynamic, and more importantly, what you do after sending it. Remember this principle throughout the video. You don't create pursuit by demanding attention. You create the space in which genuine interest has the opportunity to reveal itself. And once you understand that, 5 simple words can say far more than an entire paragraph ever could. One of the most common mistakes in attraction is believing that giving more will automatically create more desire, more attention, more messages, more explanations, more availability. But psychologically, constant availability can sometimes remove the very tension that makes an interaction exciting. When someone already knows that your attention is guaranteed, there is less reason for anticipation to develop. Anticipation needs space. Think about the difference between being handed an answer immediately and having a question remain in your mind. The first gives you information. The second makes you think. That is why incomplete information can be so powerful. When you reveal every feeling, explain every intention, and respond instantly to everything, there is nothing left for his imagination to explore. He doesn't need to wonder where you stand because you've already explained everything. And this is where many women accidentally weaken their own position. They think, if I explain myself clearly enough, he will understand how much I care. But attraction isn't always created through explanation. Sometimes it grows through discovery. This doesn't mean becoming cold, pretending not to care, or deliberately ignoring someone. Those are childish games. The real shift is much simpler. Stop trying to control his response. Send what you genuinely want to say, then allow him to decide what he wants to do with it. A woman with her own emotional center does not panic because someone takes time to respond. She doesn't immediately send another message. She doesn't start creating stories in her mind about what his silence means. She continues living her life. And that independence creates a different kind of presence. You become someone who can express interest without becoming dependent on the outcome. That is the foundation of intrigue. Not manipulation, not jealousy, not calculated silence. Just enough space for another person to wonder, choose, and invest on their own. Because the goal isn't to make him chase through pressure. The goal is to discover whether he naturally wants to come closer when you stop doing all the moving for him. The first secret is understanding the difference between ambiguity and confusion. Confusion pushes people away because it gives them nothing meaningful to hold on to. Intrigue works differently. Intrigue gives someone enough information to understand the emotional direction, but not enough to completely satisfy their curiosity. That small gap can become powerful. A short message can create a much larger mental conversation than a long paragraph ever could. When you say exactly what you feel, exactly why you feel it, and exactly what you expect from him, the conversation has nowhere left to go inside his mind. But when you communicate warmth while leaving a little room for interpretation, his mind may continue working after the conversation ends. He may reread the message. He may wonder what made you think of him. He may ask himself whether there was a deeper meaning behind your words. And notice something important. You didn't force him to think about you. You simply gave his mind something unfinished. Human attention naturally returns to things that feel incomplete. That is why an unanswered question can remain in your thoughts longer than an answer you already understand. But this doesn't mean you should become mysterious for the sake of being mysterious. Don't send cryptic messages that make no sense. Don't deliberately confuse him. Don't create emotional uncertainty just to get a reaction. Real intrigue is much more natural. You can be warm without revealing your entire emotional position. You can show interest without announcing how deeply invested you already are. You can let him know that he matters without making him responsible for your emotional state. That distinction changes everything. Imagine sending a message that says, in essence, "You crossed my mind," and then stopping there. You have communicated something personal. You have shown warmth. But you haven't explained exactly what you were thinking, why you were thinking it, or what you want him to do about it. Now there is space, and space allows curiosity to appear. The important thing is what happens next. You don't immediately destroy that curiosity by sending another paragraph. You don't say, "I hope that didn't sound weird." You don't explain what you meant. You let the message breathe. Because sometimes the most attractive communication is not the one that tells someone everything. It is the one that gives them just enough to become curious about the rest. And when curiosity comes from genuine interest rather than manipulation, it creates something much more valuable than a temporary reaction. It gives the other person a reason to participate. Now we arrive at the message itself. You crossed my mind today. 5 simple words. Yet notice what they communicate. They tell him that he had an impact on your thoughts. They create warmth. They reveal a small amount of vulnerability. But they don't demand anything in return. You aren't asking, "Do you miss me?" You aren't asking, "Why haven't you texted me?" You aren't saying, "I can't stop thinking about you." You are simply stating a moment of genuine thought. And that distinction matters. The message gives him information, but not complete certainty. He knows you thought about him, but he doesn't know exactly what triggered it. He doesn't know what you were feeling. He doesn't know whether you were smiling, remembering something, feeling nostalgic, or simply reminded of him by something ordinary. That small amount of uncertainty can create curiosity. But the real psychological power isn't hidden inside the 5 words. It comes from the emotional position behind them. If you send the message while secretly thinking, "Please reply quickly. Please tell me you feel the same. Please prove that you care," then the words may become part of a much larger emotional pattern of seeking validation. But if you send them because you genuinely wanted to express a thought, and you're completely comfortable allowing him to respond or not respond, then the message carries a completely different energy. That is the difference between expressing interest and chasing reassurance. Use it naturally. Maybe something reminded you of him. Maybe you remembered an interesting conversation. Maybe a familiar place, song, joke, or moment brought him to mind. You don't need to manufacture a reason, and don't send the same message repeatedly just because it worked once. Repetition removes its meaning. Something personal becomes predictable when it is constantly used as a strategy. Most importantly, don't use this message when there is no genuine connection at all, and you're simply trying to force attention from someone who has consistently shown disinterest. The message is not a magic spell. It cannot create feelings where none exist. It can only communicate something that is already true, while leaving enough room for the other person to decide what he wants to do with that information. If he responds with warmth, let the conversation develop naturally. If he asks what made you think of him, you don't need to reveal everything immediately. You can simply respond honestly and allow the conversation to unfold. And if he gives little effort, don't compensate by sending more. That is the deeper lesson. The power of the message comes from expressing interest without surrendering your emotional independence. 5 words open the door. His actions tell you whether he actually wants to walk through it. The moment after you send the message is just as important as the message itself. You say, "You crossed my mind today," and then nothing. This is where many people lose control of their own strategy. Minutes pass, then an hour. You check your phone. You wonder why he hasn't replied. And suddenly you feel the urge to send another message. "Did you see my text?" Or perhaps something completely unrelated just to restart the conversation. But this is exactly where the psychological balance begins to shift. The first message created a moment of curiosity. The second message can immediately remove it. Why? Because instead of allowing him to decide whether he wants to engage, you're now trying to pull a response from him. And there is a major difference between expressing interest and chasing a reaction. When you send one sincere message and then continue with your life, you communicate something without saying it directly. "I wanted to tell you this, but I don't need you to validate me immediately." That is confidence. Confidence doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It means you can care without losing control of yourself. So let the silence exist. Don't turn a few hours of quiet into a story about rejection. People have responsibilities, distractions, work, family, routines, and their own emotional lives. A delayed response doesn't automatically reveal what someone feels. But if you repeatedly send messages because you're uncomfortable with the silence, you create a different pattern. Now he doesn't have to wonder. He already knows you'll come back and continue the conversation for him. Give him the opportunity to make a choice. If he responds warmly, don't overwhelm him with everything you've been holding inside. Match his energy. If he sends a thoughtful message, respond thoughtfully. If he becomes playful, you can become playful. Let the interaction build naturally instead of trying to accelerate it. And if his response is cold, don't force emotional intimacy. Don't ask him why he's distant. Don't send a long explanation hoping to change his mood. Sometimes the most powerful response to low effort is simply recognizing it. This is also where confidence must be separated from manipulation. Silence should never be used as punishment. Don't intentionally ignore someone to make them anxious. Don't create jealousy. Don't disappear just to provoke a reaction. That isn't emotional strength. That's control disguised as attraction. Real confidence is much quieter. You express what you genuinely feel. Then you give the other person room to reveal what they feel. Because the purpose of the message isn't to trap him into responding. It's to create an opportunity. And what he does with that opportunity tells you far more than any carefully engineered response ever could. Sometimes the most revealing thing you can do after sending a powerful message is absolutely nothing. Let him choose. Let him invest. Let his behavior speak. There is a deeper principle behind attraction that many people overlook. Attention is not the same as investment. A man can reply quickly and still have little intention of building anything meaningful. He can send compliments, react to your stories, or keep a conversation alive for an evening without actually investing himself. So don't become obsessed with the speed of his replies. Watch what he does with his effort. Does he ask questions about you? Does he remember details you've shared? Does he initiate conversations without always waiting for you? Does he make an effort to keep the interaction moving? Does he show consistency rather than appearing only when it is convenient? These signals tell you much more than a fast response ever could. Because genuine interest eventually requires participation. You cannot build a meaningful connection by doing everything yourself. If you're always starting the conversation, always asking the questions, always introducing new topics, always making plans, and always repairing moments of silence, then you may be creating the appearance of connection while carrying the entire relationship on your shoulders. Instead, give him opportunities to contribute. Ask something that allows him to share his perspective. Leave room for him to initiate the next conversation. If you make a suggestion, allow him to develop it. If he tells you something personal, engage with it rather than immediately turning the conversation back toward yourself. Then observe. Does he step forward? Or does everything become quiet the moment you stop pushing? This is where the psychology becomes interesting. The goal isn't to make him obsessed with you. Obsession is not the same thing as healthy attraction, and chasing someone into constant attention doesn't prove that they genuinely value you. The real goal is to discover whether he naturally chooses to pursue. There is a powerful difference between making someone react and giving them the freedom to act. A reaction can be temporary. Investment requires choice. When someone invests, they spend something valuable: time, attention, energy, effort, thought, or emotional openness. And the more consistently someone chooses to invest, the clearer their intentions become. This is why you should stop measuring your success by how many messages you receive. Instead, ask a better question. Is he contributing to the connection, or am I creating the entire connection by myself? That question can save you from endless guessing. If he responds warmly, give him space to continue. If he asks questions, answer and allow him to ask more. If he initiates, receive his effort instead of immediately taking control again. If he makes plans, notice whether he follows through. Attention becomes meaningful when it turns into mutual effort. And that is the real shift. You don't need to manipulate a man into chasing you. You need enough self-respect to stop doing all the chasing yourself. When you create room for his effort, you finally get to see what he actually wants. And sometimes, the most powerful outcome isn't that he chases you nonstop. It's discovering that he chooses to come closer even when you stop pulling him toward you. There is a point where strategy stops mattering and your emotional self-control becomes the real source of power. You can send the perfect message. You can choose the perfect timing. You can say exactly the right words. But what happens after you send them reveals much more about your confidence than the message itself. If you immediately start checking your phone every few minutes, wondering why he hasn't replied, analyzing whether he saw the message, or imagining what his silence might mean, then the problem isn't the message. The problem is that you've attached your emotional state to his response. And that is exactly what you want to avoid. The woman who stays on someone's mind isn't necessarily the woman who knows the most psychological tricks. She's often the woman who has a life that doesn't stop when someone becomes quiet. She has things to do, goals to pursue, people to spend time with, interests that make her feel alive. Her attention isn't completely consumed by whether one person chooses to respond. That doesn't mean she doesn't care. She can be interested, she can feel attraction, she can look forward to hearing from him, but she doesn't make his behavior the measurement of her worth. This is where many people make another mistake. They try to create desire through manipulation. They intentionally disappear. They post things designed to create jealousy. They ignore messages to punish someone. They suddenly become cold because they want the other person to panic. These tactics may produce a reaction, but a reaction isn't the same as genuine desire. If someone comes closer only because you triggered their insecurity, you haven't created a healthy connection. You've created emotional confusion. Real confidence doesn't need those games. You don't need to disappear to become memorable. You don't need to manufacture jealousy to become valuable. You don't need to make someone afraid of losing you. Instead, become comfortable with allowing people to reveal themselves. Send the message, put your phone down, return to your life. If he responds warmly, enjoy the conversation. If he initiates, notice his effort. If he becomes consistent, allow the connection to develop. And if he remains distant, Don't spend weeks trying to decode what you already know from his behavior, because actions eventually become clearer than words. The strongest position is not being completely detached from him. It is being interested without becoming dependent. You can want someone without needing them. You can enjoy their attention without needing constant reassurance. You can hope they come closer while still being completely capable of walking away from inconsistency. That is emotional independence. And ironically, it is often what makes your presence more memorable. When someone realizes that your world doesn't revolve around their attention, they begin to understand that your presence is a choice, not a need. So don't chase the outcome. Don't spend your energy trying to force a particular response. Let him show you. Because eventually, the most important question isn't, how can I make him think about me? It's, what does he naturally do when I stop doing everything for him? That answer will tell you far more about his level of desire than any text ever could. Now step back from the 5 words for a moment, because the real power was never hidden inside the sentence itself. You crossed my mind today. Those words can create curiosity. They can open a conversation. They can remind someone of your presence. But they cannot create genuine feelings where none exist. The deeper psychological principle is much more important. You can express interest without surrendering your emotional independence. That is where the real power begins. You don't need to convince someone to chase you. You don't need to manipulate their emotions. You don't need to disappear, create jealousy, or constantly calculate your next move. Instead, you create space. Space for curiosity, space for choice, space for effort. And most importantly, space for the other person to reveal what they actually want. The 5-word message opens the door, but his effort tells you whether he actually wants to walk through it. If he becomes curious, let him ask questions. If he wants to continue the conversation, let him contribute. If he starts initiating, notice it. If he makes an effort to stay connected, appreciate the consistency. But if nothing happens, don't destroy your peace trying to force something into existence. This is where your emotional independence becomes more valuable than any texting technique. Never measure your value by how quickly someone responds. A delayed reply doesn't define you. A short response doesn't reduce your worth. And someone's lack of interest doesn't mean you weren't interesting enough. People have different priorities, emotions, circumstances, and intentions. Your job isn't to control those things. Your job is to observe them. That's the difference between chasing an outcome and allowing reality to reveal itself. The woman with the strongest position isn't the woman who knows how to make a man chase. She is the woman who knows when to stop chasing and allows his actions to speak. So send the message when it is genuine. Don't send it repeatedly. Don't wait beside your phone for a response. Don't turn his silence into a personal judgment. Express what you feel, then return to your own world. Because attraction becomes much clearer when you stop trying to manufacture it. You don't need to become impossible to reach. You simply need to remain difficult to replace. Not because you are playing games, but because your presence comes from a life, a mind, and an emotional world that already has meaning without anyone else's approval. Remember this: interest can open the door, curiosity can create movement, but only genuine effort reveals intention. And once you understand that, you stop asking, "How do I make him chase me?" You begin asking the far more powerful question: does he choose to come closer when I stop chasing him? That is where the real answer has always been.